Hello and a warm welcome to this side event to the United Nations Statistical Commission. My name is Rika Munk Hansen and I work at ESCAP, the United Nations Regional Commission for Asia and the Pacific, and here I manage our work on disaster-related statistics. I also co-chair the Global Interagency and Expert Group on disaster-related statistics. This is one of the many groups that operate under the UN Statistical Commission. And it is in this co-chairing capacity that I have the honor and pleasure to kick off today's event on disaster-related statistics, strengthening data ecosystems for enhanced risk governance. Now, disaster-related statistics is a relatively new area of statistics. Indeed, it only entered the agenda of the Statistical Commission as recently as 2018. And we still do not have internationally agreed guidance or standards for disaster-related statistics. However, by now, no one questions the necessity or the urgency of better data and statistics related to disasters. We are reminded of the importance every time disasters strike, such as the earthquakes, which are currently devastating Turkey and Syria. Increasingly, the need for statistics for risk-informed development is being highlighted. This is happening not least in the context of the global discussions related to climate change, and most of you will be aware of the recent decisions at the Conference of Parties on Damage and Loss, which links climate change and disasters much more specifically than what we have seen before. Indeed, good data are needed for planning purposes in addition to response purposes. Data for planning purposes are needed to reduce risks and responsibilities, and this is where official statistics can play a large role. Now, the focus on planning risk-informed development is also reflected in the title of today's event, where I'm sure you'll all have noticed that we've been bringing in the words data ecosystems and risk governance. This also links this side event to several topics that are on the agenda of the Statistical Commission when they meet next week. They will be discussing data governance, data stewardship, and data ecosystems, which are all topics that are currently very much present in the minds of chief statisticians around the world. Now, the next hour and a half or so should enlighten us all, I hope, on these terms and much more. We will hear experiences and initiatives taken in this space at the national and international level, and we have an excellent lineup of experts from Italy, from Mongolia, from the UK, and from the UN Statistics Division. I want to thank you all for contributing, and a warm thank you also to our co-organizer for the event today, UNDRS, which is also the organization with which ESCAP is co-chairing the Global Interagency and Expert Group. Before I hand over to our moderator for this event, I will provide a brief overview of the journey taken so far by the Global Interagency and Expert Group on disaster-related statistics. And if I could just ask my colleague to please share one slide where we've tried to put it all in one place. Kunpor, can we get the slide up? Yeah, you can go to the next one. Yeah, thank you very much. So here we have put together a timeline. There's a lot of information on this slide. I will leave it to you to study the details on your own time. We'll put this on the event website. What I will do here is just to highlight a few things. As I mentioned, disaster-related statistics was first considered as a topic by the Statistics Commission in 2018, and this is where we begin the journey on this slide. Whatever you see here in dark blue relate to decisions that have been taken by the Statistical Commission. I will focus on a few of the items here that are listed in red, because those are the items that have to do with directly with the interagency and expert groups activities. The group had its first meeting in May 2021. After the initial consultations and discussions and decisions on the focus of the work of the group, we initiated work on a common framework on disaster-related statistics. This is what we are looking to as a major outcome of the interagency and expert group, to have an agreed global common framework for this area of statistics. And we commissioned a number of issue papers on priority research topics, and this is has been discussed by the interagency and expert group at their second meeting, which we organized in September last year. We will continue discussing this framework also during this year, 2023. We plan to organize the third meeting of this expert group in June this year. Another feature of the interagency and expert group has been to convene global experts on the production and the use of disaster-related statistics. And in conjunction with the work of the IAEG, we have by now organized 2 expert forums. The first one back in June 21, which was hosted by the Economic Commission for Europe. Last year, we had the second forum hosted by the Economic Commission for Western Asia, ESCAP. And the third forum will be held in June this year, and we are the very lucky and happy hosts here at ESCAP in Bangkok in Thailand. So I do hope that we will have the chance to meet, maybe also in person, many of us later this year. So this is the overview of the journey so far. We have been very fortunate to have contributions from all over the world, both from national experts and experts in regional and international agencies. So I'll take the opportunity here to thank all of you who are active in this area of work. We are really benefiting, all of us, from excellent collaboration in this area of statistics. So with that, Kun Paul, you can stop sharing the screen there. Thank you very much. I will stop talking so that we can kick off the program of this event for real. And it is my pleasure to hand over to our moderator for today, Mr. Gregory Scott. Oh, there you are. Good to see you, Greg. Greg is the Interregional Advisor of the UNGGIM, United Nations Global Geospatial Information Management at UNSD, DESA's Statistics Division. Greg, it's all yours, please.
Thanks, Rike, and greetings to everyone around the world. It's great to be able to be part of this important side event. My task, as you've seen in the agenda that's been provided, is to moderate a panel now of 4 experts from around the world. And the way I'm going to approach this is that I will introduce each of the speakers individually, and after they've each had a presentation, if time permits, we will field a few questions. So if anyone's got any questions, they can put them into the meeting chat and we'll try and collate those. But if we don't get time to answer all of those questions, obviously we have them there as a record to follow up if need be. So without further ado, the breakup of these 4 experts is really, I guess, critically important to have 2 country experiences and initiatives, which will come from Italy and Mongolia, and then 2 domain expert experiences, as Rike mentioned, coming from the United Kingdom and also from the UN itself. So I'd like to first introduce Giovanna, Miss Giovanna Tagliacozo. She is a senior researcher at the Italian National Statistical Office, ESCAP, and has many years of experience working on social and environmental statistics. However, in recent years, Giovanna has been working on the development of statistics and indicators for the measurement of hazardous events and disasters and climate change related statistics in Italy. Among other roles, she is a member of the UNECE Task Force on Climate Change related statistics and also the Task Force on Measuring Hazardous Events and Disasters. So to start us off from Italy, Giovanna comes very, very well qualified. And Giovanna, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gregory, and thank you, Rike. I hope you can hear me and you can see the slides already. Okay, so thank you very much for the invitation and the opportunity for sharing the Italian experience on disaster-related statistics. It's a big challenge, as I am going to explain. So firstly, I would like to give just few words on the context in which we are moving and saying that the ISTAT, the Italian National Statistical Institute, is strongly committed in facing all the new and increasingly complex challenges. Of course, all statistical domains, the economic, social, environmental, are involved in an increasingly integrated way because of the complexity of the new phenomena we are going to face. And I have also to remind that 2015 in particular clearly marked the role of official statistics in monitoring the international framework, the Agenda 2030 Sendai framework and COP21. Disaster risk statistics, of course, is a crucial element under the umbrella concept of sustainable development. Goal 13 is devoted to combating climate change. It includes indicators of the Sendai, and we all know that relevant statistical information is also scattered across all 17 goals and beyond. So speaking about Agenda 2030, under Agenda 2030, in 2016, ISTAT started the dissemination of the statistical information needed with a database since 2016 and with a report in Italian and in English since 2018. These have been speaking about the experience of Italy in this context and step-by-step work starting in 2016, as you can see in the figure on the left, with almost 100 statistical measures to cover 66 SDGs indicators in that case, up to more than 370 statistical measures to cover 138 indicators. This is because the strategy in ISTAT has been to give not only the identical indicators that were available in that moment, but also integrate with proxy indicators compared to the ones required from the IAEG indicator, proxy or partial, but also with a set of national context indicators in an integration project with the well-being analysis in Italy. So this is a step-by-step progress of indicators over the years in all the goals. Which is the use of these indicators. The database, the SDGs database, has been used and is still used in Italy for the national strategy for sustainable development, for example, at national level, but also at regional level, because in Italy, every region has to produce to improve his own strategy on sustainable development, as well as all metropolitan cities. And this is why we all know that territorial information disaggregated on the territory is very important. The same, the SDGs database, the indicators that are present in the database have been used for the National Plan for Recovery and Resilience in Italy. And on the figure on the left, you can see an exercise that is in the SDG report, the capacity of SDGs to represent the missions, the 6 missions of the National Plan for Recovery and Resilience in Italy, as well as, for example, indicators has been used for the National Plan for Ecologic Transition and over. What's more, ISTAT in Italy is also aware of the importance of being part and have an active role in the community, in the international community on experts. So participating at the international network of experts, such as expert groups, task force, expert forum, and so on. This is why in this context, scopes and areas of analysis are defined, priorities are set, core set of relevant and feasible also indicators in the perspective of a National Statistical Institute are discussed, methodologies, comparabilities, and strategies also for dissemination and communication. This has a mutual benefits. On one side, it's important for the National Statistical Office to improve knowledge and awareness, but also it's important to provide and enrich the community. Sorry, but I cannot see my slide anymore. Maybe somebody.
It's back up. It's back up, Giovanna. We can. Somebody, it's changed. It's changed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Now I can. Do you see my slides? I can go on with. Because I think somebody took his own slides.
Yes.
Anyway, I put again. I hope it's working. So I was saying about the mutual benefits. So improve knowledge and awareness and provide on the other side the perspective and expertise of national statistical offices. This is why ISTAT representative actively worked and were involved in several groups, often leading with a leading role or chairing task force, and there are some examples in the slides. I would like also to mention that ISTAT is also involved in international cooperation activities. These activities are aimed at strengthening the statistical system in the country partners and share good practices. We worked with several projects on SDGs, on climate change related statistics indicators, on Sendai indicators, again with mutual benefits. The implementation, for example, of the EEC indicators on climate change related statistics in Italy. Of course, this work with the task force has been a guideline, giving recommendation and defining key set of indicators. This was a guide for the National Statistical Office for ISTAT, a guide for implementation and also for communication. And this work contributes in several editorial products in Italy. For example, on an ebook on economic and environmental, as you can see on the left side of the slide, or in the bottom, this was an inspiration for specific territorial analysis on the coast, and analysis of anthropogenic pressure on coast, for example. It was an inspiration also for providing some indicators from to the press release, or was part of the National Conference of Statistics in Italy. So different products in different context and different type of analysis. Statistical production and dissemination, again, the concept of step-by-step approach. The work to be done is very wide, considering the huge amount of statistical information required. And so a step-by-step approach I've been adopting, setting priorities first, and strengthening the use of existing statistics in a first stage, as well as strengthen the cooperation of the national statistical system with all producers of official statistics in the countries, ministries, and environmental agency in Italy, etc. Going more specific on the disaster-related statistics, we know that the scope encompasses a very large number and type of hazards, that the elements under risk are multiple, population, territories, dwellings, basic service, infrastructure, economies, agriculture, ecosystem, and so on. We know that the type of risk depends also on specific situation in countries and territories, considering the equation of risk. We know that there is a strong overlap with climate change adaptation, and we also know that the role of environmental and territorial statistics is very important. Italy, for example, is subject to geological, hydrological, meteoclimatic hazards, such as earthquakes, landslides, floods, droughts, heat waves, heavy rains, forest fires, and so on. These are also exacerbated by the consequences of climate change. They are interrelated, so there is a concept of multi-hazard that needs to be taken into consideration with cascading effects. So all these elements need to be considered in an integrated approach. And there is a need to act in the perspective of prevention and to better inform the decision maker. On the right, you can see an example under the SDG report in ISTAT of the indicators on population at risk of flood and landslides, 2020. The source is ISPRA, that is the environmental agency in Italy. For example, again, we have several indicators on the growing, in this case, temperatures, the temperatures in the cities, the situation in the cities, the number of summer days or tropical nights, as well as indicators on the incidence of urban green areas in the cities. On this, I just give some key concepts because the time is very short. So we're speaking about adaptation, about nature-based solutions, about vulnerability and resilience. In this case, again, the source is ISTAT, so we see that there are several producers of official statistics, not only ISTAT, but the environmental agency. And on the right, you can see another information that is the number of seismic events, movements, higher than 4 magnitude class. This is another source, the National Institute of Geophysics and Volcanology in Italy. And this is another editor publication from the Italian Statistical Yearbook. So in conclusion, much has been done, but much more needs to be done. There is a need of defining and exploring new data sources, methodologies, big data, data from registers, etc., where integration of data and sources is also important and needed. It's important to share knowledge, awareness, best practices at all levels, inside and outside the National Statistical Office and in the National Statistical System. So collaboration and cooperation between all institutions is crucial. It's important to identify new forms of dissemination also, and last, a systemic thinking approach is needed because of the integration of all these elements. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Giovanna. I've heard your talks a few times now, and each time I learn much more, and I can see how things are really progressing, particularly as an exemplar from Italy and ISTAT, particularly with that coordination across multiple agencies. Thank you very much. If there are any questions at all, please either put it in the chat or raise your hand. So there's an opportunity now for a few minutes to see if there are any questions at all for Giovanna. So I'll just pause for a second to see if there are any.
Could you see my slides anyway? Because I'm reading now in the chat that somebody...
Yes, we did see your slides did come back. Yes, there was a slight delay for some of us, a little bit more, but other than that, they were there. Yes.
Okay.
So yes, there is one question there, Giovanna, in terms of have you been doing work on loss and damage evaluation at all?
The work on loss and damage need to be strengthened because there is a discourse of sources. So this is an area in which the Italian Statistical Office have to work more. Yeah.
Thanks for that. And a follow-up one there in terms of this work is the interaction with the Sendai framework monitoring process. How is that working, that interaction?
Yes. Okay, always under the SDGs, we produce some indicators relevant for the Sendai framework, but the Sendai, the responding of Sendai framework, it's under the civil protection. So we are collaborating with civil protection in order to produce indicators. The work that we are doing on this is under the SDGs report at the moment.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. And thanks for that opening presentation, Giovanna. And I didn't have a question, but one comment I did want to make is in one of your opening slides, you actually had some terminology, SDGs database for policymakers. I think these strategic approaches, when you're thinking about the national action plans and the plan for recovery and resilience, how that works at a policymaker level is a very, I think is something we need to do in member states a lot more. So just wanted to applaud that. So thank you so much for that contribution. And with that, I'll now move on to our next speaker. And if I may introduce Captain Batbatar Amajagal, who is a senior specialist working in the Disaster Risk Management Department since 2018 of the National Emergency Management Agency of Mongolia, where she's been working since 2013. So a decade of experience in the National Emergency Management Agency. Again, Captain Batbatar is very well qualified and with a master's degree in disaster management from Naresuan University in Thailand. With that, I welcome you, Captain, and the floor is yours for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for introduction. Hello, everyone. So it's Amar from the National Emergency Management Agency of Mongolia. Could you please share my presentation? Okay, next slide. First of all, I would like to express my great gratitude for giving us this opportunity to be part of this side event, to share our experiences and challenges we're facing, as well as learn from other countries on disaster-related risk statistics. Now I'd like to introduce the current disaster-related statistic and database in Mongolia and how we're developing and making it accessible to the public. So since 2021, the National Emergency Management Agency of Mongolia is implementing a technical assistance project under the support of the Asian Development Bank, which call it Strengthening Capacity on Disaster Risk Assessment, Reduction and Transfer Instruments in Mongolia. So one of the outcomes of this project is developing a hazard and risk mapping, and of course all the mapping and risk assessment should be based on all necessary data. So we collect project is collected all data. So after this collecting data, we started developing a web-based risk database using the ArcGIS. So here you can see that web-based database, how it looks. So in the special database section, in the second column, all obtained and analyzed statistic data and mapping can be seen. Next, please. So in case of the exposure mapping, the exposure mapping is developed in commonly occurred hazard types in Mongolia. For instance, drought, which is the winter disaster, and dust storm, earthquake, and flood, lightning, and snowstorm, forest and steppe fires, and zoonotic disease. And elements which can be affected by these hazards are selected here. As you see that there is include territorial level, education and health facilities, roads and often railway station, electricity grids, and mining and entities, as well as livestock and others. Next, please. So here is, in case of the methodology and how we analyze and assess the exposure and risk assessment, we can see that methodology in here. So in order to identify the exposure level, first we overlapped all hazard mappings, which above mentioned, then layered each element on the map and calculated on ArcGIS. So after that, exported all and calculated data of the element. We process them in the Microsoft Excel program. So the result can be seen in the mapping. Next, please. So this slide shows that related organizations and agencies for the respective data. For example, the NEMA collected meteorology and hydrology related data from the Information Research Institute of Meteorology, Hydrology and Environment, and earthquake-related data can be collected from the Institute of Astronomy and Geophysics. And Veterinary and Animal Breeding Agency of Mongolia is responsible for the zoonotic disease, and Ministry of Food, Agriculture and Light Industry is responsible for all agriculture and livestock-related data. But for the project risk assessment, there are many other organizations we collected the data from. For instance, the data on the roads and railways is collected from the Ministry of Road and Transport Development and Ministry of Digital Development and Communications also share us with some data, as well as the Ministry of Energy. They gave us also the energy-related data. So most importantly, the National Statistics Office of Mongolia provides us with the very disaggregated data on population and housing and agriculture-related data. Next, please. Here we can see how the NSO collects population statistic data. The every administration units in Mongolia connected to the online centralized database. So this database is the main source of the National Statistics Office, and every administrative unit collects and updates the population and housing related data regularly, and collected data on birth and death can be collected from the General Authority for State Registration, which is regularly updated like in 25th of every month. Next, please. So General Authority for State Registration is responsible for collecting like 11 types of data of civil registration basic data according to the approved forms by the NSO. So NSO collects the related data from the General Authority for State Registration through the HOR system regularly. Next, please. So I mentioned the 10 types of hazard types before slides. So in this presentation, I choose the earthquake as an example only. So here you can see the earthquake hazard map. So we use this earthquake hazard map as a base and identify all elements exposure level to the earthquake by using this map. So next, please. This map is developed in 2018. This slide shows the population exposure by social groups, which is the B1B. So at first, I would like to emphasize that we divided the exposure level into 5 levels, not in 3. So the 5 levels is actually like a very high, medium, and low, and very low. So these 5 levels are identified in disaster risk assessment guidelines, which is approved by the Deputy Prime Minister of Mongolia in 2021. So we can see that how many people by age groups and sex and locations in certain level of exposure. So all data is available by each hazard types in Mongolia. Next, please. So this picture shows that how the earthquake exposure map back level, which is the smallest unit of the Mongolian administrative level. So in the element section, we can choose that what types of element we can choose, like as I said before, like it's like territorial level or roads or like health and education facilities and so on. So next to that, disaster type, so which we can choose, like it can be like earthquake, flood, flood, or like strong storm and so on. So after that, we can see the result after we choosing this type of selection. So as I said before, the color is like indicating the exposure level. So red is like very high, orange is like high, and yellow is like medium, etc. So next slide, please. So here is the education and health facilities exposure level. So I'd like to mention the one thing in here. So we collected all necessary data, but the database is still in developing process, not fully completely developed at the time. So all the green color can be changed after they completed the development of the database. So which means that those all green color can be changed into like colorless or like white or something else, so due to the location of the health and education facilities. I mean that the green color areas may not have any education and health facilities, so the colors will be changed. So cannot be seen this green color. That means like did not means it's like a very low exposure level. Next, please. Here we can see that road exposure map from the database. The project analyzes the exposure of the state paved roads. So like the previous slide, the green colored areas will be changed after the completion of the development of this database. As you can see that here, we can see the right and central region of the country is highly exposure in the earthquake. Next, please. So in case of the availability of the land and infrastructure exposure data, those red highlighted elements and exposure we did not assess at the time. So of course we do not have peers in Mongolia because we are the landlocked countries. So within the ADP project, we would not collect the data on the water supply infrastructure and water sewage and treatment systems. And therefore we do not have this kind of data in hand at the moment. So perhaps in the near future, we can collect this data and can be available. So in case of the critical public and administration building, we collected all buildings data, but we do not classify them into how to say like critical and administration building yet. So in case of the land, we assess the level of agriculture and pastoral land areas. Next, please. So here's the main challenges we're facing currently. At first, the database is newly developed in Mongolia, so we have limited human resources to maintain and enhancing this database in the future. So maybe the best option can be the training for those who's responsible for the database maintenance and developing process. The second is the technical capacity, such as like higher performance computers to work on the special and ArcGIS systems. And the next thing is the limited software capacity. So which means like we use the ArcGIS program to develop this hazard mapping, but the ArcGIS every year it should be updated. So the updated software and the high performance is the main thing. So these are the main challenges we are facing at the moment, so which need to be improved in the near future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bapata. Thanks. As a geographer, it was great to see maps and see this translation of data, statistical data and hazard data and exposure data put into a very highly disaggregated mapping environment, because that really does help us answer a lot of the complexities around what is happening where. So thank you so much for your presentation. And out of that has come a number of questions as well, which isn't surprising. The first one is, how frequently is the national database system updated that you were talking about?
So actually this database is just developing since like 2021, as I said before, but due to the disaster, maybe like it should be updated maybe like every year in some kind of disasters, but I think it depends on the disaster. Some disasters can be like occurred in Mongolia every year, such as like a winter disaster.
And what mechanisms do you use to collect and update the data? Do you have a number of agencies, or does that happen within your agency, or do you have a cross-government collective that helps in doing this?
Yeah, actually, that all government agencies and is responsible to collect, provide us with some data, so we can collect the data and we also can share it with them.
And another question is, how are the products that are being developed, and this is actually really important in terms of the hazard maps, how are they then used to consider and then potentially reduce risk? And do you have any examples of that? So does, as an outcome of that hazard, vulnerability, exposure, then look at risk mitigation factors that may also take place, or even risk adaptation itself?
Yeah, actually, the Mongolia has like 21 provinces. So each province have a different kind of, how to say, the climate. I mean, they have their own like special weather and disasters. It can be like different in each province. So after we identify each province's risk in the administrative unit, so it can help us with the developing method. And also we have within this project, we also developed disaster risk planning, and have to develop planning and have to reduce the risk based on the risk assessment and hazard mapping.
Thank you. You can see in the chat, I hope you're getting lots and lots of questions, but also lots and lots of applause as well for the work that you've done. I have just one last question. How did you derive gender data to assess risk vulnerability? And I guess this is the observation that women are more exposed than men to some risks. What was the mechanism for that? And apologies for so many questions, but this is the last one for the moment.
Sorry, I didn't get that.
So how do you derive gender data to assess risk? So the vulnerability where women may be more vulnerable than men, or vice versa, to certain hazards or certain risks?
Yeah, actually the data is collected from the NSO, then the location as well, the population data and the location. After we have to say the overlapping and the hazard mapping, the women are the most vulnerable. Maybe it can be have to say like the Mongolian, the population, the woman is more than the man, maybe.
Yes, and yes, that's probably true, and that's variable across countries as well. Look, thank you so much. A great presentation, and I will say from a personal perspective, look forward to hearing more about this in the future going forward. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
And with that, we'll now move to Ms. Kanza Ahmed. Kanza is a consultant in global public health for the Global Disaster Risk Reduction and Global Health Security teams at the newly formed UK Health Security Agency, what was previously known as Public Health England. She has extensive experience of epidemiology and statistics, having graduated from the UK Field Epidemiology Training Program. Kanza is currently leading the disaster-related statistics pilot on behalf of the Interagency Expert Group Task Force on Measuring Hazardous Events and Disasters. And today, Kanza is going to tell us more about the statistical review of hazard definition and classification. So with that, the floor is yours, Kanza, and welcome.
Thank you very much, Gregory, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody on the call. Thank you very much for joining us. Would somebody be able to share my slides, because I don't appear to have the ability to do so, if that's okay, please. Thank you very much. So you've had the introduction, so we'll move to the next slide, and I'll just go through the two key things that I'm going to be covering today. They are different topics, but they are interconnected. So as Gregory mentioned, I'll be talking about the disaster-related statistics pilot project that we are undertaking and sharing with you some of the emerging findings that are coming out of that. And I will also, towards the end, talk about the new model and system for losses and damages tracking, which UNDRS, WMO and UNDP are working on together to develop. So on the next slide, just kind of giving you sort of a bit of background of how the work around disaster-related statistics, and particularly this pilot, came about. So in 2019, the 50th session of the UN Statistical Commission, it was recognised actually that there's a need for better data and statistical measurement, and that will enable us to improve the understanding around risk reduction, strengthening resilience and preparedness. We've heard two absolutely excellent presentations from colleagues in Italy and Mongolia about how that data is used and combined to make it effective, so they can actually challenge sort of policy and make the appropriate changes in terms of risk reduction. More recently, however, on the next slide, this week we saw the UN General Assembly discussing the main findings and recommendations of the midterm review of the Sendai framework. And one of the recommendations that stuck out was around the importance of collaboration between statisticians and disaster risk reduction practitioners, because working together, we will actually be able to improve the quality in disaster risk related data collection and analysis. And again, actually bringing all the different sectors together, because we recognise, and again, we heard in the previous presentations, that data sits in different parts of government departments, and we need to bring that together to better understand what is happening. So the background to this project on the next slide, and talking a bit more around sort of how this project came about. So in October 2021, UNDRR and the International Science Council published the Hazard Definition and Classification Supplement, also known as Hazard Information Profiles, or HIPS for short. And what this document aimed to do was to provide a common set of hazard definitions to enable better monitoring and reviewing of the implementation of the Sendai framework, the Sustainable Development Goals, and the Paris Agreement on climate change. Once we had those definitions, what was really important was to understand how can we actually develop statistical definitions. And how can we measure the harm from these hazards? So we have a list of 302 hazards. These have been defined by global partners, and over 150 different partners were involved from the private sector, the public sector, and the UN and academia and science. But actually, how do we measure what the impact of an earthquake is? How do we measure what the impact of a flood is? And we hear how colleagues in Italy and Mongolia have started that work. So on the next slide, the primary objectives of this project was to actually get feedback on whether or not those definitions for those hazards, those 302 hazards, were applicable from a statistical perspective. And what we wanted to do was identify any possible gaps and shortcomings, and to use that to develop some practical guidance around how we can have statistical definitions. And what we're doing is we're bringing together different people who have expertise, and what we're trying to identify is where good practices is happening. So we're not actually aiming to create something new. What the purpose of this project was to actually bring together the best practice across the globe and actually see how we can answer each other's problems and challenges and be able to provide solutions that work for everybody. So how have we gone about this? On the next slide, we've got the methodology, and I'm going to briefly sort of discuss this and actually go on to the more exciting bit, which is what we've actually done so far. So we have a task force for statistical review. And that comprises of myself, Michael Nagy from UNECE, Urbano, who was actually on this call, and Daniel Clark from OECD. So it's sort of a mix of expertise that's on that group, and together we lead the project. And we have a project team, fabulous project team from UKHSA, who are then delivering this project and implementing it. One of the key things we've done is a literature review, and then also led to having systematic reviews with experts and voluntary pilot testing by countries, and I'll talk a bit more about those in a moment. But we've used a variety of techniques, from online survey, focus groups to individual interviews as well, because we wanted to try and get as much information as possible so that actually we can produce recommendations that are usable and will be used by everybody. So what have we achieved to date? So on the next slide, this is what we've actually found so far. So we've undertaken workshops with global stakeholders, the 15 participants across 2 sessions. The literature review has identified 109 relevant papers that actually we are using to understand what is already out there around disaster-related statistics and where the gaps are in terms of our understanding. We undertook systematic reviews with experts, and we did that in 2 ways. We had an online survey with several hundred responses from across 47 countries, and we had expert focus groups that included 25 participants across 3 different focus group sessions. We've also undertaken 2 voluntary pilot testing sessions with 2 countries so far, so Canada and Mexico. And I'll go into a bit more detail about what we did. And we've also invited 2 more countries, Georgia and Indonesia, to join us, so that actually what we are aiming to do is have high, middle and low income country representation, so that we can actually collate all the relevant good statistical experience and methodologies across the different countries and different ways of working. On the next slide, I thought this was quite interesting, and I thought this might be of interest to yourselves on this call, is we did a stakeholder analysis of the survey to look at which countries responded to the survey. Now, if the green bit indicates who responded to the survey and which countries did, and the grey bit tells us that people didn't. However, that doesn't mean that their opinions haven't been included, because actually representatives from the greyed out countries have been involved in the expert focus groups and the systematic review focus groups. So actually, we do have a much wider representation, and our final report will actually acknowledge that. I want to talk a bit more about the voluntary pilot testing by the countries, because I know that that will be of interest to many of you, and certainly it will fit very much with what we heard from colleagues in Italy and Mongolia. So on the next slide, the objective for the pilot testing by countries was to get feedback from experts who work on statistical databases. So people like our colleagues in Italy and Mexico who know this day in, day out, they work with this data, and they actually sort of, having to understand how to bring it together and the impacts. So the way we went about this is we asked each of the countries to identify hazards that were either a particular priority or a particular issue for them, where they either had good data or didn't have good enough data, so we could understand where the strengths and weaknesses were and what solutions might be in place. So the hazards of focus for Canada and Mexico were around earthquake, extreme cold, flooding, tropical cyclone, wildfires, and tsunami. And this actually generated some absolutely fascinating discussions with the project team to understand what data existed and how the different government departments did or didn't work well together, and who holds what data. Because actually, one of the things we've learned through this project is that NSOs, National Statistical Officers, don't always hold all the data we need. And actually, even disaster management agencies don't hold all that data. So it's how do we develop that relationship with different government departments to bring all that information in one place so that we are better prepared to be able to actually deal and reduce the risk from some of these hazards. On the next slide, just wanted to share with you the emerging findings, and I've split them into 3 themes, but there is actually a much bigger sort of piece of work that sits underneath that. So the 3 emerging themes so far is the importance of having robust data collection on a national level and being able to collect it in a timely manner so that actually you can respond to it effectively and quickly. The second thematic area is that we've identified strengths and challenges of data collection methods. There are some really good ways of working that other countries might benefit from learning, and there are challenges that they've had that actually other countries might have the solutions for. And we want to try and bring those together. And the third thematic area is talking about the challenges and recommendations when it comes to introducing a global methodology for disaster-related statistics. Because ultimately, if we want to have disaster-related statistics, it is entirely dependent on how good your surveillance system is. Now, we recognise that high-income countries will have far more developed surveillance systems, right? And low-income countries will have less developed surveillance systems. So what we need to have is almost proxy methodology that actually means that other countries, the countries that don't have surveillance systems that are highly developed, have a proxy indicator to be able to respond to Sendai framework monitoring with the figures that are required. And so this is sort of some of the discussions we need to be having about what works and what doesn't work. So rather than us coming in and actually suggesting a solution, we're looking for actually what solutions are already out there. Now, our next steps in terms of this project are that we have actually got, under these 3 themes, a list of about 30 odd recommendations. Now, we are not going to be able to, put together a report with 30 recommendations. We recognise that actually the challenge of sort of putting recommendations together is that they've got to be ones that people can actually do something about, that they can work towards. So what we're going to do is, once we've finished our final focus groups, is actually develop a survey, and we would invite you all to engage with that. And if you do get it, the copy of the survey, do pass it on to other colleagues. And if you don't get it, do get in touch with us and we can send it on to you. What we're going to be asking all of you to do is to actually nominate or select your 5 most important recommendations. Because what we thought was more important was, rather than giving you a list of 30 recommendations when we publish the report later this year, is actually to use 5 recommendations so we have clear, smart, measurable objectives that we can work towards, all of us can easily work towards, and be able to report our progress against in subsequent years. Because actually it's a big jump to try and develop this methodology, and so actually we want to start in a way that works for everybody. So actually you will have the opportunity to contribute and help decide and shape what those recommendations should look like, because ultimately it will be our colleagues in country who will be helping to deliver these. So it's useful to get your opinion on these. So I just want to take the opportunity to thank everybody who's been involved in the pilot project. And I'm looking forward to continuing to engage with colleagues on this call, and for those who haven't been able to join us. And we do hope that actually the findings we publish in September will be useful for you. Now, linked to disaster-related statistics and understanding some of that information is the stuff around advancing losses and damages tracking system. And this is the work that I referred to earlier that UNDRR, UNDP and WMO have been leading, and it's a great partnership. It's about looking at developing a new model, a new system, so that we can track losses and damages easily, because we know that actually, whilst mortality data systems are in place in a lot of countries, we can estimate how many people are affected. What is harder to estimate is what the impact of losses and damages are. If you have a flood in your local town, How are you going to measure the loss and how are you going to measure that damage? And this new model and system is going to help us to work towards developing that. So on the next slide, just a bit of background of where this work has come from. So it is building off Desinventar, and I know a lot of you will be familiar with Desinventar, which has been the disaster loss accounting system that we've had in place since 1994. And what's happened is that whilst it has fulfilled a purpose, the world has moved on. And there are greater needs in terms of the type of data we are collecting, the way that we analyse the data, the way we view the data. And actually, the questions that we are now being asked around the data are different as well. People want to understand what triggers these events. How can we link them to impacts, and particularly around weather-related and hazardous events, as we're seeing more and more of these occurring. We also want to understand the impact of cascading events. So it's one thing, and it's an example that I always use, is that, you know, if you have an earthquake under this ocean that leads to a volcanic eruption under the ocean, that then leads to a tsunami, that then leads to buildings collapses, how do you begin to measure the loss and damage around that? And how do you understand the impact of a cascading event? And so it's really important that actually we have data standards with common terminologies and based on the hazard classification to be able to develop this. But what also is helpful is to have interoperability and customization of analytics and data visualization. We saw some excellent data visualization from colleagues from Italy and Mongolia. It would be amazing to be in a position where actually we could do that for all countries participating in that. But even more interestingly, it would be to overlay it with poverty data. So not only do you understand who is at risk, but you understand who is the worst affected if you have a hazard occurring. And so that is what the purpose of this project is in terms of developing the new model. So what does the new model comprise of? On the next slide, there's over 7 steps that outline what the new model and the losses and damages data value chain looks like. So you want to identify cases so you can inform the collection analysis of whatever the product development is, and have data collection in place or access to being aggregating the data as per having, you know, as per the common standards and classifications. Technological solutions and the capacity to transform data is the important bit. And this is where actually this project is really important, because actually what it wants to do is actually give a technological solution so that you can integrate, import and export the data in a way that's functional, that enables you to analyze and statistics and have that technical support. But also to have enhanced visualization, so you have interactive options. So if your minister is asking for certain information or a certain community, you'll be able to pull that out. To have gender-based statistics, to be able to pull out who is most affected, where are they living, and why are they most affected. But also actually then be able to interpret that information, because that's the important bit. We don't just collect data for the sake of collecting data. We want to interpret the losses and damages data, so actually we can have interpretations in place that support decision making around this, and actually having better policies and programs at all levels, nationally and internationally, and so that we can act on this data, because that's the important bit. That is why we have disaster-related statistics. That is why we are doing all of this work. So I've talked about all of this, but what does the model actually look like? And you were pleased to hear my final slide is an outline of the model. Or the proposed model that we want to work with. So starting from the left-hand side of this slide, a hazard occurs. So you have a drought or a flood or a heat wave. You might have 2 things. You might have a drought and a heat wave. Okay. In the system, you will record the hazardous event, right? So when it started, when it ends, what type of event, the spatial area, and our colleague in the next talk will talk a bit more about the geospatial mapping, the hazard specification and the description of the event, but also importantly, what other events link to it. Because majority of the time, hazards don't occur in isolation. They're often linked to other things. And having the ability to record that linkage is going to be really important. Once that information is collected, the recording of the event impact is going to be the next step. So actually, what are the cascading effects? What caused it? Because that's important, actually understanding where's it come from, who was affected, where was affected, and what was the time. And underpinning all of this is having good data standards, data governance, and data architecture, so that everybody is able to effectively record that information. But why do we want to record that information? That final bit on the right, application. We want to apply that data using the proposed model so we can strengthen the monitoring of disaster losses, so we can have more accurate figures and understand what is happening, who's been affected, and how then they can be supported. So having risk-informed national and local plans, because once you understand who's at risk, you can begin to plan to reduce the risk. Also, having better financing and insurance products is really important. So actually we understand, okay, how much is it going to cost us if this earthquake occurs? Where does that support need to go to? And how do we target it quickly? Also to inform post-disaster needs assessments. And this, I think, has been highlighted so strongly with the devastating disaster in Turkey and Syria with the earthquake. The need to do needs assessments effectively and quickly, and having that data in place is important. So having this system in place is going to be crucial to it, in future, because natural hazards will always occur, but they don't have to become disasters. The other thing that will help to inform is the early warning systems that enable early action. And there's a lot of work going on around the early warning systems, but also to strengthen humanitarian action so you can actually deploy people to the right place at the right time. And also having a better understanding of disaster impact on sustainable development, because ultimately sustainable development goals are linked to a lot of the work we're doing in Sendai framework. And so it's important to understand how sustainability can be achieved. So that is the model in a nutshell, and I'm conscious that I've gone through it very quickly, so open to questions. The UNDRS colleagues will probably better place to answer some of these questions, and I did sort of undertake this presentation on behalf of colleagues at UNEC and UNDRS. I just want to take this opportunity to thank all the stakeholders who've been involved in both projects. Your contributions have been valuable, and I look forward to continuing to work with you in the future. So thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Kenzo. Great presentation. Two components to it, but both very much highly linked, and certainly draws in the two previous presentations. I actually have a whole bunch of questions myself, but I'm not going to go into that. I'm going to let others speak first. There was one very early question around saying that Costa Rica wasn't on that map, and that global map that you used in one of your earlier slides, and you may want to comment on that. But one of the recent questions that you may just see there on the chat now: how would this work for events that are less predictable, that occur rapidly, for example, such as earthquakes, and how this humanitarian response might work? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so is that referring to the model or the disaster-related statistics pilot, or both?
I'm not sure, but it could be. I think it could be related to the second, but
yeah, I can try and cover both, but I'm also open to UNDRS colleagues who are probably more experienced.
The latter, yes. Just to confirm, the latter, yes.
Thank you very much. So effectively, there's sort of what you'll be able to do in this system is to record what the impact is of a hazard, right? So if you have had an earthquake that has occurred in an area, you can begin to understand what the impacts were and learn from other countries. In terms of events that are less predictable, earthquakes, whilst they're not predictable in terms of the timing that they occur, what is predictable is that we know that actually where the fault lines are and where the risk is. So we know actually if people are building properties on fault lines, that they're the ones who are at risk. So we look at, I'm referring back to the excellent map from Mongolian colleagues, which I was absolutely fascinated by, where they looked at the population at risk. So although actually it doesn't happen very often, you would be able to contribute, use your early warning system to be able to recognise who is at risk. In terms of how it would help humanitarian response, once you know who is in that population and you know the breakdown of that population, and you understand the accessibility in terms of road infrastructure, etc., when you have that information already, you can then actually inform humanitarian response. So, for example, if you had, and I'm just going to use my home city as an example because it's not, we did have a tiny earthquake last year, but there was minimal damage. But Birmingham in the UK, we're landlocked, we're not on a fault line, right? If we were on a fault line, what we do know is that there are several major road networks that go through the city. So we know that actually if there was an incident, that actually which road networks would be affected, and actually how the humanitarian responders can work around that in order to be able to respond to the disaster. So it doesn't answer all the questions, it doesn't do all the work for you. It still requires countries to actually look at risk reduction. What it does do is begin to inform what the likely impact is for other countries who've experienced this as well. But I'm also open to UNDRR colleagues who may want to chip in, who may have a bit more experience on.
Thank you. I had just, if no one else is going to make a comment on that, I was just going to add in too, is that a question here about the role of the NSOs in the proposed model. And so I'm assuming that's in the global methodology that you've been developing, but I'm not too sure. But obviously, you know, there's certainly a lot there in terms of the contribution that statistical organizations can make.
Yeah, so I think I cut out for a moment, so apologies, I may miss part of that. But in terms of the role of the NSO in the proposed model, effectively, we recognise that national statistical officers are a centre point for bringing together different statistical definitions. So it will differ slightly in the proposed model depending on the setup in each country. So if all your event-based sort of statistics go through your disaster management agency, then actually they may have that data. But we recognise is actually that data will come from different places, and the NSOs are generally the ones who are centrally placed to bring together the data from different government departments. So the role of the NSO will be slightly different depending on each country, but we do sort of advocate that actually the NSO is engaged in this process because they do hold certain levels of data.
Awesome. Thank you. Kenza, thank you so much for the presentation and your contribution today. Now with time slowly getting against us.
Hi, Greg. I just wanted to compliment what Kenza mentioned, if you can give 30 seconds.
Oh, sure, Rahul. Sorry, yeah. I didn't see your hand there. Yes,
no, I put my hand at just 2 seconds back, actually, because I didn't want to interrupt your conversation with Kenza. So very quickly, we just wanted to mention that, yeah, so basically on this sudden or the sudden onset events. So it's more the, you know, if you can look at it as a grandparent and parent and child connection of hazards. So as the hazards happen, there are a number of, you know, impacts that happen downstream. And that's what the connection that we want to build with the work for WMO, and that's what they are doing on. And this is a work that's come through their formal processes and their experts on what they call the cataloging of hazardous events. So what they have upstream, the kind of results of that, which results in impacts, which the NDMOs and to an extent the NSOs are recording. They are more recording the impacts, but WMO has the expertise on the science behind the hazards that happen as they happen. And this is all tied up with the 302 hazard classification, which again, Margin Amore, who was the chair of, and she's here also, that has been set up. So there is a link with all the experts that we've got on different types of hazards, but specifically on the fast hazards, sudden onset hazards. This link is very, very, very strong. We'll be happy to take on, and we can also provide more information on the side through written inputs as well. Thank you for this opportunity, and thanks, Kenza, for taking that one.
Great, thanks for closing that loop, Rahul. Really appreciate it. So, and with that, I'd now introduce our final speaker for today, Mr. Mark Iliff. He's a geographer. He's within the Secretariat for the United Nations Committee of Experts on Global Geospatial Information Management, which is housed within the United Nations Statistics Division here in New York. He supports the work of several functional groups of UNGGIM, including leading the development of the adopted by the Statistical Commission and UNGGIM Global Statistical Geospatial Framework, or the GSGF, and also the SDG's Geospatial Roadmap, which is the bridge between the statistical and geospatial communities for the global set of SDG indicators. So Mark is going to tell us a bit more about the interconnectivity of disaster-related statistics and the geospatial domains. Mark, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg, and thank you very much to all of the presenters that have come before. I think many of you have highlighted the importance of geospatial information and geographic information in the role of disasters and disaster-related statistics. And really, this is where I'd like to start the presentation today. You know, the global assessment report that was produced by UNDRR last year really sort of highlighted why we need data and that we have a massive data gap. And it highlighted the need that we need to transform ourselves. You know, simply doing more of the same will not be enough. We need to invest in data, and inherently that data will be geospatial because everything happens somewhere. You know, the understanding of geography really is about understanding our interconnected world. And Kanza and others have discussed today, you know, disasters are inherently cascading challenges that we face. One thing leads into another. And geospatial information is how we understand our world. It's a digital version. It's a blueprint of what happens where. And it's also the means for us to integrate all data related to human, economic, and environmental activity. Now, we all know the value of geospatial information. We use it every day to get around, to navigate. We all remember I'm sure from COVID-19, the hotspot maps that allowed us to understand the spread of the disease. And really, you know, it's at the heart of how we solve some of the global problems and help achieve the ambition of the SDGs. So when we think about the disaster risk management cycle, you know, several of the speakers today have talked about sort of hazard identification and understanding our exposure, but also, you know, how do we consume understanding and monitoring for disasters, you know, here for a buoy, for a tsunami. But then it's also about how do we respond to disaster? How do we understand, you know, okay, these are at-risk populations, and we now have a disaster that's in front of us. How do we respond to that? But then how do we recover to it? And, you know, in this, you know, as Kanza was talking about, the application of that data is really key because we don't want to just look back. You know, statistics, you know, really look at a statistic. It looks at what has happened in the past. We now need to be thinking, how do we model the future? How do we understand the impact of these cascading events? And then how do we manage, you know, measure potential loss and damage? All of that is going to be underpinned by geospatial location. So really, when we're looking at the disaster risk management cycle, plan, prepare, respond, and recover, geospatial information is cutting across all of these points and is needed by different sets of people. They can be within the National Statistical Office, you know, by consuming that data and producing disaster-related statistics. It could be from a National Geospatial Information Agency, which is traditionally the entity within the government that is producing a lot of that geospatial information that is out there. You then have the disaster management agencies that are going to be taking that data, and as our example from Mongolia showed, you know, taking the data that's produced from across government to provide actionable guidance when and where a disaster will hit. But then we've also got global and regional organizations that are supporting early warning activities and modeling and monitoring. And each of those data streams, you know, there's many cut across the entire government. So really it is a whole of government approach to leveraging the data that is there, whether it's address data, whether it's cadastral data or water, you know, modeling floods, understanding pluvial flooding or tidal flooding, where it will start to link with hydrography. So all of these data themes are fundamental to a country. And really, when it comes to GGIM and what we're working at here in New York is around how do we sort of link these global development frameworks, such as the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and also the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction to these global geospatial frameworks to help strengthen the use of geospatial information in a country. This isn't just specifically within a national geospatial information agency, it's across those different institutions that need geospatial information. At the anchor point for all of this is the Integrated Geospatial Information Framework, which is recognized as the framework that helps bring geospatial for the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. For national disaster agencies, there is the Strategic Framework on Geospatial Information and Services for Disasters. For statistical officers, we have the Global Statistical Geospatial Framework, the GSGF. And, as I mentioned on the previous slide, the global fundamental geospatial data themes that describe sort of how and what are the forms of data that we need across a country that can then be used to inform on disasters. And then linking all of these together for the Sustainable Development Goals is the SDGs Geospatial Roadmap. And I will be taking us through briefly through these frameworks now. So starting with the IGIF, the Integrated Geospatial Information Framework, it's a strategic framework that's composed of 3 parts. Part 1, the overarching strategic framework, sort of describes why geospatial information is a critical element of national, social, and economic development and what needs to be strengthened. This is a guide that can be used to take to high-level decision makers to advocate why geospatial information cuts across all levels of government. Part 2, the implementation guide. It details what actions need to be taken to strengthen geospatial information management. And part 3, to complete that puzzle, country level action plans. Now, these are not specialized. These are not specialized by us. These are specialized and created by the countries, their own country level action plans. So there's not, one size fits all action plan. It's developed and tailored to your individual needs and institutional frameworks that details how actions will be carried out, when and by whom. And all of these frameworks are available on our website as well. So with the IGIF, the roadmap for implementing the IGIF is through 9 strategic pathways. And really, each of those strategic pathways can be applicable across the government. This isn't just for a national geospatial information agency. They're presented as a puzzle because there are different aspects and dimensions to each individual pathway, which can be addressed, by itself. But in that work, they need to come together to be united. So you have a framework for geospatial information that is connected, that is integrated, and then can be implemented to support your national geospatial information program. Now, within that, you'll see that this framework can also connect and hook into other thematic areas. So by implementing the IGIF, you're providing a foundation and a means to implement the other frameworks that are being supported by the office. And additionally, the 3 strategic pathways are organized, to respond to 3 principal areas, which are equally important: governance, technology, and people. We can have the best technological systems, but if our people can't use it, they're not going to be able to be used. If we don't have the governance structures in place to be able to take advantage of that, it's not going to work. We need to strengthen each of these principal areas equally so we can achieve the aims that we need. Now, specifically for disasters, I'd like to show you the strategic framework on geospatial information and services for disasters, which is a guide for member states in their respective national activities to ensure the availability and accessibility of quality geospatial information and services across all phases of the emergency cycle, helping prevent or reduce social, economic, environmental risks and impacts. Now, this is a framework that is deliberately for the National Disaster Management Agency. It's going to help contribute to implement the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, providing key priorities for action, whether that's on governance and policies, awareness raising and capacity building, data management, common infrastructure and services, and resource mobilization. Each of those priorities are actually a key at all stages of the disaster risk management cycle. Coming now into the statistical domain, the Global Statistical Geospatial Framework, GSGF. It's a framework for integrating statistical and geospatial information. It's been adopted by both the Statistical Commission and UNGGIM. Now, the importance of this is that it's providing actionable guidance primarily for statistical officers to produce statistical data that is geospatially enabled. By producing geospatially enabled data, you're able to compare across different geographies. You're able to compare and understand the data that you have available at all stages, whether it's for disasters or other socioeconomic or environmental needs. In that, by making it interoperable, you're able to combine the data together using different statistical methods to inform decision making and policy making. Because ultimately, we want to provide actionable guidance, from that statistical data, so we can understand and inform action. And finally, sort of the SDGs geospatial roadmap. We know the many outcomes and outputs of geospatial information coming from Earth observation, satellites, or sensors. How do we make this? Is this official data? Last year, the Statistical Commission recognized that geospatial and location-based information is official data for the SDGs, and that is done through the SDGs geospatial roadmap. I will not go into this detail now, but it provides key actions that countries can take in different phases to help strengthen their people, technology, and governance to achieve data for the SDGs. Because ultimately, we need to solve this institutional puzzle, and it's many forms of data, many themes of data, and many institutions. And it's by working together that we can help have the impact that we need. So with that, I'd like to say thank you very much. I'm very happy to answer any and all your questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Hugely appreciated. So, and I know time's just about against us, but if we've got one or two urgent questions, we can take those. I just will make a comment, and I think Rike mentioned it in her opening statement. There was a couple of queries as to whether the presentations would be made available, and the answer to that is yes, they will be made available on the website. So I just thought I'd confirm that. Any questions at all? If not, and noting time is heavily against us, I'm going to conclude with our panelists today, and just wanted to thank you all four of you, for literally an A to Z on what we need to be thinking about in disaster-related statistics. So thank you so much. I would like to leave with one final comment that Kanza mentioned in one of her opening slides, the UN General Assembly and its midterm review around the Sendai framework. Really, this need for more data and this momentum requirement really provides extra motivation and mandate for this critical work that we're discussing right here today. And I think that it's incumbent on us to really think about some of that in the future. With that, I will thank you all. I will conclude, hand over to, I think, Animesh, who will be closing, but just wanted to thank our presenters today for a great effort. So thank you all.
Thanks, Greg. So I would not take a lot of time. You've already done a very good work in moderating the session. So just to introduce myself, I'm Animesh Kumar. I'm the head of the UNDRR Bonn office, and also with Rike, the co-chair of the Interagency Expert Group on Disaster-Related Statistics. I think this event was very good, very enriching. And on a very personal note, also glad to be sharing the virtual stage with geographers. I'm a geographer as well, and was equally thrilled to see such insightful maps that were used in the presentations. To begin with, I would like to recall the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction and its very strong focus on disaster-related data standards while engaging the national DRR offices and the statistical offices. As Rike, our co-chair, also pointed out in her welcome remarks, that this event should also be seen in context of the outcomes of the COP27, which will be considered as a watershed conference in context of the loss and damage discussion, establishment of a fund on loss and damage, full operationalization of the Santiago network, and are some of the key highlights. As the agenda of the loss and damage transitions from being a political agenda to a more substantive agenda, the first questions we will receive are, how much are we losing? Where are we losing? And what is the nature and magnitude of the losses? So the risk can be better priced and actions to avert, minimize, and address can be better informed. Similarly, the launch of Early Warnings for All initiative last year that seeks to cover everyone on the planet with an early warning system in the next 5 years is another major initiative. The success of this initiative again depends on the right data and statistics, both to have the right risk knowledge identified as the first pillar, but also to better monitor the coverage and effectiveness of early warning systems. This event at the Statistical Commission, hence, is happening at a very opportune time. We have seen massive data collection and analysis since the adoption of the Sendai framework and the SDGs. 156 countries are currently reporting on Sendai framework monitor. 110 countries have developed disaster loss and damage tracking system. Metadata standards have been further enhanced through the development of the new hazard definitions and classification in line with the Sendai framework, acknowledging Professor Virginia among the participants, and also thanks to Kanza for the lead on its statistical review. In November, as Kanza mentioned, a technical forum on tracking losses and damages was organized in Bonn, which saw very encouraging participation from governments and international organizations. The forum voiced an urgent need for massive investments into strengthening of the data ecosystem. As the demand for data increases, the need for a stronger collaboration between disaster risk reduction and the statistical community is no more optional, but an imperative. The discussion in the event today have made several important points, which I noticed. One was need for stronger monitoring systems, including for losses and damages, and better methodologies and evaluation systems for losses and damages. Another was in terms of need for data to facilitate intersectional approaches. Not a unidirectional issue, but a composite picture of risk. We all know that keeping hazards constant, it is a differential vulnerability and exposure that accounts for losses and damages. The example from Mongolia was good in terms of understanding exposure. And then finally, need to enhance national and local statistical capacities. We saw several questions concerning how frequently is data collected, how frequently are the databases updated. The ongoing process that we are following to develop a global footprint on disaster-related statistics and its framework, hence very important from the view of ensuring that while we delve into volumes of data, we retain its quality and robustness, so that when we talk about a disaster in different places, we mean the same thing. The collaboration between NDMOs and NSOs is also important to address some of the concerns raised today in context of limited capacities in data collection and its sustainability. The discussions were very enriching, and while not all of them could be answered due to limited time, we will get back to you individually and respond to your queries. Hence, to conclude and getting back to the topic of today's event, if we are serious about strengthening the disaster data ecosystem, the NDMOs, the National Statistical Offices, and all sectoral authorities need to work hand in hand as they are the key actors and stakeholders of this ecosystem. So thanks again for your attention and interest, and hope to see many of you in Bangkok for the next forum for producers and users of disaster-related statistics. So greetings to all and have a nice evening ahead. Thank you very much.